Virginia's gubernatorial race intensified last week as early voting kicked off, with former Governor Terry McAuliffe facing off against GOP challenger, former CEO Glenn Youngkin, in the first general election debate on Thursday. Politicos are looking to the Virginia race for hints on what the rest of the country can expect in the next year's midterms. Donald Trump has endorsed Youngkin in the race, and the results could reveal just how big of a role the former president will play in future elections. Here now to discuss is national politics reporter for The Hill, Julia Manchester. Welcome back to Rising, Julia.
Thank you for having me.
So what are you hearing on the road in Virginia? It seems like the race is tightening. There's momentum on both sides. What are you hearing?
It's absolutely tightening, and I think you're seeing in a number of polls, really, Glenn Youngkin start to catch up to Terry McAuliffe, a former governor, and I think that has some politicos a little worried in the state, particularly Democrats worried in the state, because Terry McAuliffe has high name ID in Virginia. He's the former governor. He left office in early 2018, with relatively high approval ratings. So that's something that I think a lot of folks are watching. At the same time, though, I think both sides are really trying to focus on the issue of turnout. Look, there's more Democratic voters in Virginia just because of the population centers of Richmond and Northern Virginia. At the same time, though, if you're seeing McAuliffe starting to not have a huge lead in the polls, and if there isn't an enthusiasm, if there's a large enthusiasm gap there, I think that's the plus side for Youngkin, that he can really catch up to McAuliffe.
What's driving the tightening of the polls, and how much are Democrats in Virginia panicking?
Well, I think in terms of the tightening of the polls, what you're seeing is increased advertising on both sides. Glenn Youngkin is really starting to boost his name ID and starting to boost his name ID with voters that probably wouldn't have known his name just a couple of months ago. So I think that's part of it. You're also seeing more coverage in Virginia media markets on the race. Remember, this is an off-year election. Voters aren't normally paying attention. I think there's probably quite a bit of fatigue from the 2020 election. So I think now, late in the game, they're starting to pay attention, and particularly Republican voters in the state are starting to get amped up. Remember, there's not as many Republicans in Virginia, but they're a pretty strong conservative base. So you're really starting to see conservative figures starting to rally the troops. In terms of how much Democrats are panicking, I don't know if I would call it panicking, but they're definitely keeping a laser focus on this race, and they're not taking anything for granted. I spoke to McAuliffe last week, and he said, look, I'm running like I'm 20 points behind. I'm not taking anything for granted. So I think that's the attitude they have right now.
Well, and obviously the Trump endorsement was huge for Youngkin, but who's McAuliffe calling on? What big name Democrats can we expect to go out for him?
Well, we've already seen President Biden come out and campaign for McAuliffe. That was in Northern Virginia earlier this summer, and that was a big deal. I think probably one of the bigger rallies we've seen so far. But you saw Vice President Kamala Harris come to Virginia last week and fundraise for McAuliffe. McAuliffe held a fundraiser with former President Bill Clinton in upstate New York. Remember, McAuliffe is very close with the Clintons in a professional and personal capacity, so they are very much getting involved in this race. And you're seeing other big name Virginia figures getting behind McAuliffe on the Democratic side: Senator Mark Warner, Senator Tim Kaine, Governor Ralph Northam. So you're seeing the Democratic side very much coalesced around McAuliffe, and I think part of that is because McAuliffe is a huge figure in establishment politics on the Democratic side.
When they call on President Obama, we'll know it's really tightened.
Do you think was it a mistake for Democrats to go back to the establishment in Virginia? Is it dampening enthusiasm?
No, I don't think it is. Look, Jennifer Carroll Foy, a lot of the support she got in the primary, and she was the main progressive running in the Democratic primary, a lot of that support actually came from outside of Virginia. I think you saw, on the progressive Twitterverse and such, a lot of outside progressives making a lot of noise about Jennifer Carroll Foy. Within Virginia, though, I would say the majority of Democrats are probably more centrist or moderate and would naturally lean towards a Terry McAuliffe at this point. Outside Virginia, I think that's a different story. But I think Virginia, while it's starting to become much more blue, I wouldn't say it's reached a progressive point yet.
So, meanwhile, Axios has reported that Beto ORourke, former congressman, Senate and presidential candidate, is planning a political comeback by running against Texas Governor Greg Abbott next year. Beto is expected to announce his candidacy sometime in the next few months. A new poll shows ORourke slightly behind Abbott in a hypothetical matchup, winning 37% of votes to Abbott's 42. Julia, Abbott is incredibly unpopular. But Beto ORourke, with everything in his favor, fell short. In his 2018 race, when he ran for president, he took a number of positions that he's going to have to defend throughout this campaign. Do you think that there's a path for a Democrat in Texas in 2022? And if so, could Beto be that Democrat?
It's interesting. I think a lot of this depends on Democrats on the ground in the state and how much coordination there is between the Beto ORourke campaign, the Texas Democratic Party, and other Democrats running in Texas. Look, we've seen Texas start to inch more towards becoming maybe a purple state, starting to become maybe a blue state. But at the same time, every time we talk about that during a campaign cycle, Republicans still win. And I think what you're seeing is that Republicans simply have, first of all, more voters on the ground at this point in Texas, though that is slowly changing. And they have more money. They have a better operation in the state of Texas. So this could become a test for not only Beto ORourke, but for Democrats in Texas as to, how far they can go in this election. And, if Texas is really that close to turning purple or blue. At the same time, though, I think this abortion law in Texas that Governor Abbott signed and was very much touted hasn't, you're seeing a lot of Republicans, it seems, in Texas, while some have embraced it. It seems like this is a tough issue for Republicans. I've called a number of Republican operatives, lawmakers in Texas, and a lot of times my calls go unanswered because they don't want to be talking about this issue. And you're seeing folks like Beto ORourke and other Democrats really pounce on this issue. So that could be an opening to attack Abbott going into this race.
Okay. Well, Julia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising after this.